The king has abdicated the throne.
A new dawn is coming.
The Iron Throne doesn't just sit beneath a ruler, it judges them. And in this episode, it feels like it has already made its decision. Blood has been spilled, trust has been broken, and power is slipping through Rhaenyra's fingers faster than she can hold on to it. What we witnessed wasn't just another step in the war, it was the moment everything started to fall apart. Because this isn't the rise of a queen anymore, this is the beginning of her end. This episode opens with a sense of weight, not just in the atmosphere but in every decision being made. Rhaenyra sits on the Iron Throne, but there's no comfort in it. There's no peace like the one her father once had. Instead, there's tension, pressure, and a constant reminder that her claim is being challenged from every direction. The throne itself becomes symbolic, not as a seat of power, but as a warning. Just like we've seen before in the history of Westeros, the throne doesn't accept weakness, and it certainly doesn't forgive instability. And right now, Rhaenyra's reign is anything but stable. The realm around her is slowly turning, and the cracks are becoming impossible to ignore. What makes this episode so powerful is how it balances multiple storylines while still pushing one central idea: control is being lost. From the very beginning, you can feel that things are not going according to plan. The Butcher's Ball, which should have been a decisive moment, instead feels like a chaotic turning point. It's brutal, messy, and far from the clean victory that Rhaenyra would have needed to solidify her rule. And that's the theme that carries throughout this entire episode: nothing is clean, nothing is certain, and nothing is fully under control. At the same time, the people of King's Landing are starting to lose faith. And this is where the real danger begins. Because in Westeros, power doesn't only come from dragons or armies, it comes from perception. If the people believe you are weak, then you are already halfway to losing everything. The city is struggling. Resources are running low, fear is spreading, and the Gold Cloaks, who should represent order, are instead becoming victims of chaos. Murders in the streets, whispers in the shadows, and a growing sense that the crown is failing them, all of this builds a narrative that Rhaenyra cannot control. And once that narrative takes hold, it's almost impossible to reverse. But what makes it even worse is that the threats are not just external. They are internal as well. The people closest to Rhaenyra are beginning to show cracks in their loyalty. Conversations that once carried confidence now carry doubt. Decisions that once seemed united are now filled with hesitation. And in a war like this, hesitation is deadly. Because while Rhaenyra is trying to maintain control, her enemies are doing the exact opposite. They are patiently waiting, slowly pulling strings, and allowing her own weaknesses to do the work for them. And this is where the episode really begins to shift. Because it's no longer just about battles or strategy, it's about psychology. It's about how pressure changes people. Rhaenyra isn't the same person she was when she first claimed the throne. You can see it in the way she reacts, in the way she handles those around her, and in the way she begins to make decisions out of fear rather than confidence. And once a ruler starts acting out of fear, it becomes a cycle that's very hard to break. Every moment in this opening section feels like it's building towards something inevitable. Not a sudden collapse, but a slow and painful unraveling. And that's what makes it so effective. Because instead of giving us one shocking moment, the episode gives us a series of smaller cracks that together form something much bigger. Something far more dangerous. Because by the time Rhaenyra realizes what's happening, it might already be too late. If the opening of the episode showed the pressure building, then this next part shows exactly what that pressure creates: cracks that can no longer be hidden. And nowhere is that more evident than in the death of Sir Criston Cole. Because this wasn't just the fall of a soldier, it was the fall of an idea. The idea of honor, of legacy, of going out in a way that people would remember. And instead, what we got was something far more brutal, and far more realistic. Criston Cole walks into this battle already defeated, even if he doesn't fully admit it to himself. The men around him are tired, broken, and outnumbered. You can feel it in the way they carry themselves, in the silence before the fight even begins. There's no confidence, no belief, just the understanding that this is where it ends. And yet, despite all of that, Criston still holds on to the idea that he can control how his story finishes. That he can go out with a sword in his hand, fighting until his last breath, and be remembered as the warrior he always believed himself to be. But war doesn't work like that. It doesn't care about reputation or pride. And that's exactly what this scene shows so clearly. Because instead of a glorious final stand, what Criston gets is chaos. Confusion. A battlefield that doesn't follow the rules he thought it would. The trap that's set for him is almost cruel in how effective it is. Bodies laid out like the aftermath of a previous fight, creating the illusion of safety, only for it to turn into something far worse. And by the time he realizes what's happening, it's already too late. As the attack begins, everything falls apart almost instantly. His men, already on the edge, start to break. Some try to fight, others try to run, but there's no real coordination, no real resistance. And in the middle of all of this, Criston is left trying to hold on to something that no longer exists: control. He loses his weapon, he loses his footing, and slowly, he loses the image of himself that he had built over so many years. What makes his death so impactful isn't just how sudden it is, it's how undignified it feels. There's no final speech, no heroic moment, no last stand that people will sing about. Instead, he's struck down before he can even fully react. Arrows cutting him down, ending his life in a way that completely contradicts everything he wanted. And that's the tragedy of it. Because just one episode earlier, he was talking about legacy, about songs being sung, about how he wanted to be remembered. And now, the only story left behind is one of failure. But this moment is bigger than just Criston Cole. It sends a message. A very clear one. That this war is no longer about knights and honor. It's about survival. It's about doing whatever it takes to win. And for Rhaenyra's side, this victory isn't clean or heroic, it's brutal, calculated, and effective. It shows that her forces are willing to adapt, to use deception, to fight in ways that go against the traditional rules of warfare. And while that might secure victories in the short term, it also contributes to the larger problem, the perception of her rule. Because victories like this don't always inspire loyalty. Sometimes, they create fear. And fear can be just as dangerous as defeat. The more ruthless the war becomes, the more the people begin to question what kind of ruler they are being led by. And that doubt, once it starts to grow, becomes incredibly difficult to stop. At the same time, this battle highlights something else that's been building in the background: the strength of Rhaenyra's enemies. Because while she is dealing with internal struggles and trying to maintain order in King's Landing, her opposition is gaining ground. They are organized, strategic, and most importantly, patient. They are not rushing into reckless decisions. Instead, they are allowing moments like this to weaken her position, both politically and emotionally. And as the dust settles on this battlefield, the reality becomes impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a victory, it was a warning. A sign that the war is shifting into something darker. Something more unpredictable. And for Rhaenyra, every win seems to come with a cost that brings her one step closer to losing everything she's trying to protect. Because in this game, it's not enough to win battles, you have to win the story that comes with them. And right now, that story is slowly slipping out of her control. If Criston Cole's death showed us how the war is changing on the battlefield, then this next part shows something even more dangerous: how it's changing the people within it. Because the biggest threat to Rhaenyra right now isn't just her enemies outside the walls, it's the growing doubt inside them. And in this episode, that doubt becomes impossible to ignore. Rhaenyra is trying to rule the way her father did, holding on to the idea of stability, of control, of keeping everything together through authority alone. But the difference is, her father ruled during peace, she is ruling during chaos. And that changes everything. Because the methods that once worked are now starting to fail, and every decision she makes feels like it's pushing her further away from the control she's trying to maintain. You can see it in the way she handles those closest to her, in the way her patience is wearing thin, and in the way fear is slowly starting to guide her actions. And that fear becomes even more clear when we look at the people around her, particularly those she once trusted. Hugh Hammer and Ulf the White are perfect examples of this shift. These are men who were given power, given dragons, and given a place in something bigger than themselves. But instead of loyalty growing stronger, it's starting to weaken. Because power doesn't always create loyalty, sometimes it creates expectation. And when those expectations aren't met, resentment begins to build. There's a quiet sadness in the way Hugh looks back at his old life. The simplicity of it. The freedom. The sense that, despite having less, he somehow had more. And that contrast is important. Because it shows that not everyone is driven by the same things. Rhaenyra sees dragons as strength, as a way to secure her rule. But for Hugh, that strength came at a cost that separated him from the very life he was trying to improve. And when he finally returns, hoping to find meaning in what he's done, he's met with rejection. His wife doesn't see a hero, she sees someone who left her behind. And that moment changes everything. Because now, the justification he had been holding on to begins to fall apart. And when that happens, the question becomes, who does he blame? Himself, or the queen who put him in that position? And if that blame shifts toward Rhaenyra, then what we're looking at is the beginning of something far more dangerous than an external threat, it's betrayal from within. At the same time, Ulf represents another side of that same issue. A man who never truly wanted the responsibility that came with power. A man who enjoyed the freedom of his old life more than the expectations of his new one. And when you have individuals like this holding something as powerful as dragons, it creates instability. Because their loyalty isn't rooted in duty or belief, it's rooted in circumstance. And circumstances can change very quickly. But it's not just within her inner circle that things are beginning to break. The people of King's Landing are also starting to turn. And this is where the situation becomes even more critical. Because when the people lose faith, it creates a ripple effect that spreads through every layer of power. The streets are no longer safe. The gold cloaks, who are meant to protect the city, are being hunted. Resources are running low. And instead of seeing a ruler who can fix these problems, the people are seeing someone who is struggling to contain them. And in a city like King's Landing, perception is everything. Fear spreads faster than truth, and once it takes hold, it becomes almost impossible to control. Every whisper, every rumor, every act of violence adds to a growing narrative that Rhaenyra is losing her grip. And even if that's not entirely true, it doesn't matter. Because belief can be just as powerful as reality. This pressure forces Rhaenyra into a position where she feels she has to prove her strength. Not just to her enemies, but to her allies as well. And that's where her decisions begin to take a darker turn. The way she deals with Alicent and Helena is a clear example of this. Instead of showing restraint, she tightens control. More guards, more restrictions, more isolation. It's a move meant to display authority, but it also reveals insecurity. Because true power doesn't always need to prove itself. And the more she tries to enforce it, the more it begins to look like she's afraid of losing it. Alicent, on the other hand, becomes something unexpected in this moment. Not just a rival, but a mother trying to protect what she has left. Her actions aren't driven by ambition anymore, they're driven by fear for her child. And that creates a very different kind of dynamic between her and Rhaenyra. Because now, the conflict isn't just political, it's personal. It's emotional. And that makes every decision carry even more weight. When Alicent reveals the location of Aemond, it's not just a strategic move, it's a desperate one. A gamble in the hope that it might create some form of resolution. But for Rhaenyra, it presents an opportunity. A chance to remove one of her biggest threats. And the plan she forms from this information shows just how much her mindset has shifted. Because instead of direct confrontation, she chooses manipulation. Using Alicent as a way to draw Aemond out. Turning trust into a weapon. And that's the moment where everything becomes clear. Rhaenyra is no longer just reacting to the war, she is being shaped by it. Every loss, every betrayal, every challenge is pushing her further away from the ruler she wanted to be, and closer to something far more ruthless. And the question now isn't whether she can hold on to power, it's what she's willing to become in order to keep it. As the episode begins to move toward its conclusion, the focus shifts from internal fractures to something just as dangerous, the quiet moves being made beyond Rhaenyra's immediate control. Because while she is dealing with unrest in King's Landing and cracks within her own circle, her enemies are continuing to play a much smarter, much longer game. And nowhere is that more clear than in what happens with Corlys Velaryon. Corlys has always been a figure of strength, loyalty, and experience. A man who understands war, politics, and the cost that comes with both. But even someone like him has limits. And throughout this episode, you can feel that those limits are starting to be tested. His position has never been simple. He has suffered losses, questioned decisions, and watched as the alliance he once believed in has become more complicated with every passing moment. So when he offers to send his men to King's Landing, it feels less like a confident show of support, and more like an attempt to hold things together before they completely fall apart. But then comes the moment that changes everything. His sudden capture. And it's not just shocking because of who he is, it's what it represents. Because Corlys isn't just another lord. He's a symbol. A pillar in Rhaenyra's claim. And if someone like him can be taken, then it sends a message that no one is truly safe. That the balance of power is shifting in ways that are becoming harder and harder to predict. And when you look at who might be behind it, it starts to make even more sense. Ormond Hightower isn't fighting this war with brute force alone, he's fighting it with strategy. With patience. With the understanding that sometimes the best way to win isn't through direct confrontation, but through weakening your opponent piece by piece. And taking someone like Corlys isn't just about removing a key figure, it's about creating an opportunity. Because Corlys is not blindly loyal. Not anymore. The way he has been treated, the losses he has endured, and the shifting priorities around him have all created a situation where his allegiance is no longer unshakable. And that's exactly the kind of opening someone like Ormond would look for. If the right offer is placed in front of him, power, recognition, a chance to regain control, then the possibility of him turning becomes very real. And if that happens, the consequences for Rhaenyra would. Devastating. At the same time, we see Daemon Targaryen moving in a way that feels both familiar and dangerous. Daemon has never been a man of patience. He's driven by action, by instinct, by a desire to take control rather than wait for things to unfold. And in this episode, that side of him is stronger than ever. The chaos in King's Landing, the attacks on the gold cloaks, the growing influence of the enemy within the city, all of it pushes him toward one conclusion. Something needs to be done, and it needs to be done now. His decision to move through the city in disguise shows just how serious he is about finding answers. It takes him back to his roots, to a time when he understood the streets better than anyone. But even with all of that experience, what he discovers is far more troubling than he expected. Because the enemy isn't just outside the walls, they're already inside. Hidden in plain sight. Working quietly, patiently, and effectively to destabilize everything from within. And that realization changes the stakes completely. Because you can't fight an enemy you can't see. And the more Daemon tries to uncover the truth, the more it becomes clear that this isn't something that can be solved with a single battle or a single act of violence. This is something deeper. Something more organized. And most importantly, something that has been building for far longer than they realized. What makes this even more dangerous is the contrast between Daemon and Rhaenyra. While she is becoming more cautious, more controlled, more focused on maintaining her image of authority, Daemon is moving in the opposite direction. He's becoming more aggressive, more impulsive, more willing to take risks. And that difference in approach creates tension. Because in a war like this, unity is crucial. And right now, it feels like they are slowly drifting apart in how they see the path forward. And then we have Ormond and Daeron, a partnership that, on the surface, looks like a simple alliance, but underneath, is something far more calculated. Ormond isn't trying to be the face of power, he's trying to control it from behind. Positioning Daeron as the rightful ruler, while quietly shaping the direction of everything around him. It's a strategy that relies on perception. Because if the realm believes in Daeron, then Ormond doesn't need to fight for the throne himself, he already controls it. But Daeron himself is not as committed to this path as Ormond would like. There's hesitation there. Doubt. A sense that he's being pulled into something he doesn't fully believe in. And that creates an interesting dynamic. Because while Ormond is building his plans on the assumption of control, Daeron's uncertainty could become a weakness, or a turning point. As everything begins to settle, the full picture becomes clear. This episode wasn't about one major event, it was about multiple pieces being moved into place. Pieces that are setting up something much bigger. Something far more destructive. The lines are being drawn more clearly, the alliances are becoming more fragile, and the war itself is evolving into something that's no longer predictable. And for Rhaenyra, the reality is starting to close in. The throne is no longer just a symbol of her right to rule, it's a test she is slowly beginning to fail. Every decision, every loss, every shift in loyalty is bringing her closer to a point where holding on to power might cost her everything. Because this is no longer just a fight for the crown, it's a fight to survive what comes after it.